Welcome to today's deep dive. We are really thrilled you're joining us because today we are taking you straight into the nerve center of a rapidly unfolding, just highly volatile geopolitical crisis.
Yeah, things are moving incredibly fast right now.
They really are. To do this, we're unpacking a highly detailed brief that just dropped on a KULT Patreon post. Now, if you follow global intelligence, you know that KULT is sort of famous for aggregating real-time, unfiltered diplomatic and military data.
Usually before the ink is even dry on the official press releases, frankly.
Exactly. And the picture this specific report paints is startling. It outlines the immediate, literally hour-by-hour European fallout following the initiation of Operation Epic Fury, which is a massive U.S.-Israeli military campaign against Iran.
Right, and the sheer scale of the shockwaves hitting Europe right now it's unprecedented in recent memory.
It is. Now, before we dive into the logistics and the missile intercepts and all that, we do need to set the table. Because this crisis is actively unfolding right now and the stakes are globally significant, we want to be completely upfront with you.
Definitely.
Our goal today isn't to take sides, or debate the morality of these policies, or endorse any military actions from the political left or right. We are looking at an intensely sensitive event here.
Right, our sole mission is just to cut through the noise. We want to impartially map out the facts, the military movements, and the diplomatic shockwaves exactly as they are detailed in our source material.
Exactly. We just want you to walk away from this deep dive fully informed of the reality on the ground. So, okay, let's unpack this, because what we are looking at in this KULT report is how terrifyingly fast a supposedly unified front can fracture when faced with real-world kinetic military action.
It really is a wake-up call.
You read about alliances like NATO or the European Union on paper, and they seem like these impenetrable lockstep monoliths, right? But the second missiles actually start flying, that unity just evaporates.
It's a masterclass in how individual national interests will always collide with overarching international alliances when push comes to shove. When a crisis of this sheer magnitude hits, governments stop looking at the theoretical treaties they signed decades ago. Instead, they look at their own immediate geography, their domestic economies, their own airspace.
Pure survival mode.
Exactly. What we're seeing across the European continent right now isn't a unified strategic response. It's a chaotic scramble for self-preservation. And the resulting fractures within NATO and the EU are profound.
Well, let's ground this in the timeline first. The catalyst for everything we're about to discuss is Operation Epic Fury. According to our source, this joint U.S.-Israeli military campaign against Iran officially kicked off on February 28.
Which is just 5 days ago?
Just 5 days ago. The trigger was the total collapse of negotiations over Iran's nuclear capabilities. And we aren't talking about a limited surgical skirmish here.
Not at all.
The report cites the Associated Press, confirming that Iran's supreme leader, Ali Khamenei, along with hundreds of others, were killed in the initial wave of attacks.
Yeah, a massive decapitating strike on the country's leadership.
It sent an immediate shockwave across the globe.
And what's fascinating here is the sheer velocity and the geographical spread of the blowback. The retaliation from Iran wasn't just rhetorical, it was instantaneous and widespread.
They hit back hard.
Iran launched a massive wave of retaliatory ballistic missile strikes across the Middle East. They obviously targeted Israel and various Gulf states. But critically, for our focus on the European fallout, those Iranian missiles also targeted the British military base at Akrotiri.
Right, which is a crucial staging ground located on Cyprus.
Exactly. Just put yourself in the shoes of a European head of state for a moment. You wake up to the news that Iranian missiles are actively impacting a European military outpost.
The theoretical threat is suddenly very, very real.
And it forces an immediate recalibration of every single country's strategic posture.
And you can see that panic, that recalibration, in how violently the continent's response fractured. The KULT report essentially groups the European reactions into distinct camps. So let's start with the pushback.
The brick walls.
Right. The nation's throwing up an absolute brick wall. We know Spain drew a hard line. They completely banned the U.S. from using its joint operation military bases in Rota and Meran for this campaign.
Which is a massive roadblock.
How big of a logistical blow is that for the U.S.?
Oh, to understand the weight of that ban, you have to look at what Rota and Meran actually do. These aren't just, parking lots for Jeeps. They are the primary logistical gateways for U.S. military power projection into the Mediterranean and the Middle East.
So you can't just bypass them easily.
Right. Denying access to them forces the U.S. military machine to completely redraw its operational map on the fly. We're already seeing the tangible fallout from this.
Yes.
Flight tracking data from the report shows that 15 U.S. aircraft were suddenly forced to relocate.
And these weren't agile little fighter jets, were they?
No, these were primarily KC-135 aerial refueling tankers.
Which are basically massive flying gas stations, right?
Precisely. They are the absolute lifeblood of any sustained air campaign because they allow bombers and fighters to stay in the air without returning to base.
So where did they go?
Those 15 tankers had to scramble and depart for Ramstein Air Base up in Germany.
Wow.
And moving your fueling hubs hundreds of miles north into Germany completely alters the math of the operation. It means your combat jets have to burn more fuel just to reach the tankers. It drastically cuts down their time on station over the target area, and it completely clogs up European airspace.
And the diplomatic justification from Spain was just as aggressive as the logistical disruption, really. The Spanish foreign minister, José Manuel Albares, flat out told Reuters that the bases cannot be used for anything outside the bilateral agreement with the United States.
Or actions that are not in line with the Charter of the United Nations.
Right. He is essentially invoking the UN Charter as a shield against a NATO ally.
Which is a huge statement.
And the White House didn't take that lightly. President Trump responded to the base ban by openly threatening to cut off trade relations with Madrid.
Which perfectly illustrates how quickly a military crisis can metastasize. You have a kinetic war in the Middle East suddenly spiraling into a potential economic war between two NATO allies.
Yeah. And while Spain is using its geographical distance from the Middle East to its advantage, effectively putting up a closed for business sign, you have other NATO members who just don't have that luxury.
Right. Geography dictates a lot of this.
Exactly. Turkey is navigating an entirely different nightmare because they share a direct physical border with Iran.
Turkey is caught in a geopolitical vice grip right now. They have Western obligations as a NATO member, but they're also a Middle Eastern power desperate to avoid a localized border war.
So what did they do?
Consequently, Ankara unequivocally condemned the attacks, going so far as to label the U.S.-Israeli operation illegal, and they completely closed their airspace and territory to U.S. forces.
And we actually have a breaking detail from the KULT report that proves Turkey's geographical anxiety is entirely justified.
The intercept.
Yes. Just today, Wednesday, a terrifyingly close call occurred. NATO air defenses had to engage and destroy an Iranian ballistic missile that was heading straight toward Turkish airspace over the eastern Mediterranean.
Let that sink in for a second.
You literally have a ballistic missile intercepted on the physical edge of Europe. In response, Turkey is furiously warning all parties involved against any actions that could escalate the conflict.
They are walking a razor's edge. An Iranian ballistic missile is destroyed near a NATO border, and Turkey is frantically trying to keep a lid on a boiling pot that threatens to spill right into its own backyard.
Here's where it gets really interesting, because between the outright rejection from Spain and Turkey, you have a second group of nations trying to thread an impossibly delicate needle.
The defensive mobilization camp?
Exactly. We talked about how the British base in Cyprus was targeted. How is the UK handling their response, knowing they are already actively in the crosshairs?
Well, British Prime Minister Keir Starmer made a highly calibrated, legally cautious decision. He authorized the use of UK bases by US forces, but with incredibly strict caveats.
What kind of caveat?
The bases can only be used for purposes that are specific, limited, and defensive.
Wait, how does that work in practice during an active bombing campaign? Who decides what constitutes a defensive action?
That's a very fine line. The report specifies that the UK bases can be used to launch strikes against Iranian missiles while they're sitting at their storage sites and launchers.
Okay, so preemptive.
Right, it's an active, preemptive defense, neutralizing the threat before it launches toward European assets. But Starmer drew a hard red line against using British soil to facilitate offensive, punitive strikes deep into Iranian territory.
So it's a calculated attempt to protect their own personnel without formally joining the U.S. offensive campaign.
Exactly.
And while the UK parses the legalities of base usage, France and Greece are just physically rushing to fortify the Mediterranean. They're deeply concerned about shielding Cyprus from further Iranian drone and missile attacks.
The sheer amount of heavy military hardware being deployed to those waters in a matter of days is staggering.
It really is. It is a massive projection of power. French President Emmanuel Macron didn't just issue a diplomatic protest. He deployed the absolute crown jewel of the French Navy, the aircraft carrier Charles de Gaulle, along with its entire escort strike group, directly to the eastern Mediterranean.
He also pushed specialized air defense systems and a French frigate straight to Cyprus.
Right, and Greece matched that intensity. They sent their most advanced warship, the frigate Kimon, alongside a second frigate and a squadron of F-16 fighter jets to create a protective umbrella over Cyprus.
Think about what that visual means for you, the listener. In the span of just 5 days, the eastern Mediterranean has morphed from a bustling network of commercial shipping lanes into a tense, heavily fortified defensive perimeter.
Bristling with advanced warships and combat aircraft.
It highlights a continent bracing for impact. The UK, France, and Greece are scrambling to throw a shield over European assets. But moving further along the spectrum, we find nations that are actively stepping up to support the U.S.-Israeli campaign. However, when you look past the press conferences, there is a stark divide between their rhetoric and their reality.
Germany is the perfect example of this. The German Chancellor Friedrich Merz came out and explicitly backed the objectives of the United States. He delivered a very sharp public statement saying, quote, "This is not the time to lecture our partners and allies."
Which, on paper, sounds like unwavering, ironclad solidarity.
It does. But then there's a catch.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the irony is incredibly thick. Despite that robust, supportive language from Chancellor Merz, the German government simultaneously ruled out any direct military involvement whatsoever.
Let me ask you this, because the reason they gave is fascinating. Foreign Minister Johann Wadephel didn't cite legal restrictions or diplomatic concerns for staying out of it. He blatantly cited insufficient military resources.
Yeah.
Is that just convenient political cover so they don't have to get their hands dirty? Or are they genuinely tapped out of hardware?
It might offer a convenient political off-ramp, sure, but it is grounded in a very grim reality. It exposes the long-term atrophy of European defense budgets.
Wow.
Germany is verbally backing the play, but openly admitting on the global stage that they simply do not have the operational capacity or the hardware to project power, even if they wanted to. It's a remarkable admission of resource vulnerability.
Contrast that inability to act with Albania, which offered a much more straightforward level of support. Albanian Prime Minister Edi Rama gave explicit vocal backing to the operation, declaring that his country stands steadfastly with Israel.
Right, a much clearer stance.
So what does this all mean for the overarching alliances? We have this chaotic mosaic across the continent right now. Spain and Turkey are actively blocking the U.S., risking economic and border warfare. The UK, France, and Greece are turning their coastal waters into a defensive fortress. Germany and Albania are cheering from the sidelines, but offering no kinetic support.
It's a mess.
What happens to the bureaucratic giants, NATO and the European Union, when their member states are pulling in 3 entirely different directions?
You end up with complete institutional gridlock.
Yeah.
Look at NATO. NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte tried to walk an impossible diplomatic tightrope.
How so?
Well, he publicly praised the U.S.-Israeli operation, stating it successfully weakened Iran's nuclear and missile capabilities. But in the very next breath, he made it crystal clear that the NATO alliance itself, as a unified institution, will absolutely not participate.
He essentially had to step up to the podium and say, "We applaud the results, but we want nothing to do with the execution."
Because he knows half his alliance is either blocking the planes or scrambling just to defend their own borders.
Exactly. And if NATO executed a delicate sidestep, the 27-nation European Union was reduced to total paralysis.
Total paralysis. The EU relies on consensus, and with its member states so violently divided, the apparatus completely froze. The absolute best the EU could muster was a weak, watered-down statement calling for maximum restraint.
Which feels like a corporate committee helplessly watching a fire burn while arguing over the font size of the evacuation notice.
That's a very apt way to describe it. Maximum restraint is the lowest common denominator of diplomacy. And the KULT report gives us an incredibly brutal, unvarnished look behind the curtain at the EU's true standing during this crisis.
Yes, the brutal truth. The report includes an anonymous quote given to Reuters by an EU diplomat, and it completely strips away the polite fiction of European unity. The diplomat told Reuters flat out, quote, "Europeans are mere spectators. Nobody has any influence with Trump."
That single sentence completely shatters the illusion of the European Union as a cohesive geopolitical superpower capable of steering global events.
It really does.
It exposes the underlying fragility of their soft power. When faced with unilateral, aggressive action by its most powerful external ally, the EU apparatus simply cannot cope. They are relegated to the sidelines, forced to watch the consequences unfold.
So let's pull all of these threads together. We started this deep dive looking at a massive military operation in the Middle East. But what we've really uncovered is how Operation Epic Fury has fundamentally fractured Europe in just 5 days.
Just 5 days.
You have nations in stark opposition like Spain and Turkey who are willing to risk trade wars and border escalations to keep the conflict at bay. You have massive defensive scrambling from the UK, France, and Greece, rushing aircraft carriers and fighter jets to shield their own assets from retaliatory strikes.
Right.
You have resource-strapped verbal support from countries like Germany. And sitting above it all, the overarching institutions of NATO and the EU are left paralyzed, unable to herd their own members into a single cohesive strategy.
Which brings us to why this is so critical.
Exactly. And here's why this matters directly to you, the listener. It is incredibly easy to look at a map, see a unified block of allied nations colored in the same shade, and assume that guarantees stability.
But it doesn't.
No. This crisis demonstrates that international agreements and unified fronts are incredibly fragile under pressure. Understanding these specific geopolitical fault lines, knowing exactly where and why a continent fractures when the heat is turned up, is absolutely crucial for making sense of global stability moving forward.
You have to know where the tracks are.
You simply cannot understand tomorrow's news without understanding how quickly these alliances are breaking down today.
This raises an important question, and it's something I want to leave you to ponder, building on that incredibly blunt quote from the anonymous EU diplomat.
Okay.
If a massive historic alliance like NATO is fundamentally designed around the concept of collective security, the deeply held idea that an attack on one is an attack on all, what happens to the entire architecture of global alliances when member states suddenly realize that in moments of acute life-or-death crisis, they aren't actually co-pilots in their own defense, but merely passengers watching the conflict unfold from the back seat?
That is a deeply unsettling but absolutely necessary question to ask as the map continues to shift beneath our feet. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. We hope this breakdown helps you cut through the noise and grasp the vital moving pieces of this unfolding situation. Until next time, keep questioning the world around you.